Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of nowhere, the real middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the nearest town is a gas station and a prayer, and the sky is so wide it feels like it might swallow you whole. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, and the desert is holding its breath. That last sliver of purple light clings to the ridgeline, like it's afraid of what comes next. And then you see it. Something in the sky that shouldn't be there. Something glowing. Something that moves in ways that don't make sense. And you're not some teenager with a shaky cell phone camera. You're not a campfire storyteller spinning yarns. You are a federal law enforcement special agent, trained to observe, trained to report, trained to stand in a courtroom and say exactly what you saw, under oath, under penalty. And what you saw, you can't explain. Welcome back to Sleepy Deep Dives. I'm glad you're here. Pull up a chair, pour yourself something warm, because tonight we're going somewhere very few people have been, into the classified reports of the United States government's own investigations into unidentified anomalous phenomena. What I'm about to share with you comes from declassified slides, documents dated May 8, 2026, released through the All-domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. These slides are part of what's been referred to internally as the Pursue Collection, a trove of incident reports, analysis, and raw witness testimony from encounters with objects that the United States government cannot identify. Now, let me be clear about something before we go any further. These are not secondhand accounts. These are not rumors whispered in chat rooms. These are not blurry photos from anonymous sources. These reports were filed by federal law enforcement special agents, people whose literal job description involves being an expert witness, people who testify in court for a living, people who know the difference between a helicopter and a drone, between a flare and a satellite, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. And what they saw, independently, over multiple nights, from multiple vantage points, will make the hair on the back of your neck stand straight up. 4 separate encounters. Remote restricted zones in the American West. Dusk and pre-dawn hours. Those liminal windows when the world is between one thing and another. When the light plays tricks, or when something else moves freely, believing no one is watching. But someone was watching, and they wrote it all down. Let's begin. Our first encounter is perhaps the most visually spectacular and the most deeply unsettling, because what these agents witnessed wasn't a single anomalous event. It was a pattern, a repeating, deliberate, almost mechanical display of something that by any standard of known human technology should not exist. Picture the desert at dusk. The sky is that bruised shade of violet, the last warmth bleeding out of the sand. 3 separate teams of federal agents, 6 people total, designated in the documents as USPER-1 through USPER-6, are conducting operations in a restricted zone in the western United States. Each team consists of 2 agents. Each team is in a different location. Each team is watching the same sky. And then the orbs appear. Orange orbs, luminous, glowing with an inner fire that doesn't flicker, doesn't waver, doesn't behave like flame or light or anything these experienced observers have ever seen before. The first time it happens, the agents probably think they're looking at a flare, maybe a signal device, something explicable, something human. But then the orange orb does something that no flare, no signal device, no known object on this earth has ever done. It launches smaller orbs from itself. Let that sink in for a moment. The orange orb, glowing, radiant, impossibly bright against the darkening sky, emits from its body a cluster of smaller orbs, red orbs, 2 to 4 of them at a time, with 3 being the consensus among the observers. The red orbs shoot outward from the parent object, moving horizontally, spreading apart as they travel. And then, just like that, the orange orb vanishes. Gone. In 1 to 2 seconds, it appears, it deploys its cargo of red light, and it disappears. The red orbs, meanwhile, don't just float serenely away. Some of them move in straight horizontal lines, but others, and this is where it gets truly strange, swoop downward at sharp angles. Others head upward, climbing at steep inclines, like living things with intent, like they were looking for something. 6 federal agents, 3 independent teams, 2 separate days, and they all saw the same thing. This happened, and I want to be precise here, at least 5 times. 5 separate instances of orange orbs appearing, spawning red orbs, and vanishing. Over 2 nights, observed by multiple teams from varying distances and positions. Now, here's a detail that I keep coming back to. The documents note that it remained unclear whether the agents were observing a single recurring mother orb, one object that kept returning, or multiple separate orange orbs operating in the same area. Think about what that implies. If it was a single object, it was returning repeatedly to the same restricted airspace, performing the same deployment sequence, and vanishing, like some kind of reconnaissance protocol, a routine, a mission. And if it was multiple objects, if several orange orbs were operating simultaneously over this restricted zone, then what we're describing isn't an anomaly. It's an operation, a coordinated, systematic presence in American airspace. Either answer should concern you. The red orbs, once launched, displayed behaviors that defy easy categorization. They moved with purpose, horizontally at first, then with sudden directional changes that suggested either autonomous control or an intelligence behind their movement. The swooping, the climbing, these weren't projectiles following ballistic trajectories. They weren't wind-borne debris. They were maneuvering. And the agents, all 6 of them, agreed on the most unsettling detail of all. There was no sound, no engine noise, no whoosh of displaced air, no hum of propulsion, just silent, luminous objects doing things that, frankly, shouldn't be possible. Multiple trained observers, multiple nights, multiple locations. Same phenomenon. Orbs launching orbs. Our second encounter comes from 2 of the same agents, USPR 5 and USPR 6, and it took place during the same operational period, at dusk, in the same restricted zone. But this time, what they witnessed wasn't a fleeting aerial display. This time, they found something waiting. Imagine you're walking through the desert at dusk. The rock formations around you are ancient, twisted pillars of stone that have stood for millions of years, silent witnesses to epics you can barely comprehend. And then, perched against one of those formations, close to a jagged rock pinnacle, as if it had chosen that spot, you see it. A glowing orange orb, luminous, radiant, hovering in place with an eerie, impossible stillness. The agents estimated it was 500 to 600 meters away from their position. AARO's later assessment, using the rock formation as a reference point and likely some very sophisticated analysis, put the actual distance at closer to 1,050 meters, nearly a kilometer away. And yet, at that distance, It was unmistakable. Not a star, not a planet, not a satellite. Something else. Now, size estimation at distance is one of the most difficult observational challenges there is. It's why the moon looks like you can hold it in your hand. But the agents tried, and their initial description was curious. They said the orb was similar in apparent size to a small helicopter cockpit. AARO took that estimate, ran the math on the actual distance, and arrived at a figure that should make you pause whatever else you're doing. 12 to 18 meters in diameter. For those of you keeping score in the back, that's between 40 and 60 feet across. A ball of glowing orange light, the size of a two-story building, hovering silently beside a rock formation in the American desert. And here's where it gets truly, deeply strange. USPR 5, in their report, noted that the object did almost appear it might have had a small spindle or something connecting it from underneath to the rock formation. A spindle, connecting a glowing, impossible orb to the ancient stone beneath it, as if the rock and the object were related, attached, tethered in some way that no one could fully make out in the fading light. What was that connection? Was it physical? Was it an energy beam? Was it something else entirely, something our frame of reference doesn't have a word for? We don't know. The documents don't resolve it, but the agents saw it, or at least they saw something between the orb and the rock, and they reported it. The agents described the object, and I want to give you their exact words here because they're extraordinary, as being similar to the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, except without the pupil, or maybe an orange storm-electrify bowling ball. The Eye of Sauron, without a pupil. A vast, fiery orb of orange light hovering above the desert, watching, silent. These are not fantasy authors. These are not gamers. These are federal special agents, and the fact that their minds reached for that reference tells you something about the visceral, almost primal quality of what they were looking at. It was so alien, so other, that the closest cultural touchstone they could find was a fictional Dark Lord's all-seeing eye. And it made no sound. The documents emphasize this. The agents specifically noted that despite the orb's enormous size, potentially 18 meters across, there was no noticeable acoustic signature, no rotor wash, no jet noise, no electrical hum. Nothing. Just a massive, fiery sphere hovering with zero resistance or movement, or to be suspended. Those are the agent's words, as if gravity were a suggestion it had politely declined to follow. The entire encounter lasted approximately 1 minute, 60 seconds of observation. 60 seconds of two trained federal agents staring at something that, by every known principle of physics and engineering, should not be there. And then, presumably, it was gone. Or they moved on. Or the world simply resumed. A minute doesn't sound like a long time, does it? But I want you to try something. Sit in silence for 60 seconds right now. Don't move. Don't speak. Just stare at a fixed point and count. Now imagine that fixed point is a 40-foot ball of fire hovering motionless beside a rock in the desert, connected to the stone by something you can't quite make out, and making absolutely no sound. 60 seconds is a very, very long time. Our third encounter shifts from the sublime to the disorienting. From something vast and fiery to something small, quiet, and utterly wrong. And it happens not at dusk, but in the pre-dawn hours, that window of deepest darkness before the sky even begins to consider the possibility of light. USPR 5 and USPR 6 again. These two agents, over the course of this operational period, had already witnessed the orbs launching orbs. They had already stood in the shadow of the Eye of Sauron, and now, in the cold, ink-black hours before dawn, they were about to encounter something that started out seeming almost mundane and ended up being anything but. They saw what they thought was a car. Two lights, one red, one white, hovering about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. In the pre-dawn darkness of a restricted zone, this was unusual enough to investigate. Maybe it was an unauthorized vehicle. Maybe someone had driven where they shouldn't. The agents moved to pursue, and that's when their night took a very sharp turn. As they closed to within a few hundred feet of the object, it did something no car can do. It moved off the road, laterally, straight sideways over the rough, uneven desert floor at 15 to 20 miles per hour. No headlights sweeping the terrain, no bouncing over rocks and sagebrush, just smooth, effortless, lateral movement. And it didn't change height, not once. 2 to 3 feet off the ground, perfectly level, gliding over terrain that would shred a tire and snap an axle. The agents used the phrase zero resistance, the same phrase from the Eye of Sauron encounter, as if whatever this thing was, it existed in a bubble where friction and gravity and the rough reality of desert terrain simply didn't apply. The object traveled about 100 meters off the road, and then it stopped. And then its lights, the red and white lights that had first caught the agent's attention, went out. Just like that, lights off, as if someone had flipped a switch. As if it had parked. Now, here's where the night vision goggles come in, and where the story becomes something I've been turning over in my mind since I first read these documents. USPR 6 was wearing NVGs, night vision goggles, military grade, the kind that turn darkness into shades of phosphorescent green, the kind that reveal what the naked eye cannot. And in the split second before the lights went out, USPR 6 caught a glimpse of the object in their night vision. What they saw was a very thin line. Not a vehicle, not a drone, not a person. A thin, horizontal line. USPR 5, observing with the naked eye, described it differently but no less strangely. They saw what they called an ill-defined, dark kite shape with rounded width to sides. A kite. A dark, silent kite, about 4 feet wide, lying flat and horizontal to the ground, hovering at ankle height in the middle of the desert in the dead of night. And then it began to move again. 15 to 20 miles per hour, the same speed as before. But this time it also began to rise. It moved upward in height while maintaining its flat horizontal orientation, like a stingray gliding up through water, like a playing card slipping between the pages of a book. It remained a flat line. Even as it ascended, it didn't reveal a body, a silhouette, a shape, just that impossibly thin profile receding into the pre-dawn darkness. AARO, in their analysis of the slides, later described this object as triangular, which raises more questions than it answers. Triangular how? From what angle? Because what the agents described, a flat, thin, kite-shaped object, doesn't immediately map to what most people picture when they hear the word triangle in the context of unidentified craft. But then again, maybe that's the point. Maybe whatever this thing was, it existed in a category of one, a classification with no peer, a thing that was shaped like a kite, moved like a shadow, and vanished like a thought. 2 federal agents, pre-dawn hours, a dark, silent shape in the desert that moved with zero resistance, carried lights like a car but wasn't a car, and revealed itself in night vision as nothing more than a thin, dark line against the green glow of the desert floor. And this story? This one isn't over yet. Because 30 minutes later, in the same area, something else happened. 30 minutes. That's all the time that passed between the dark kite encounter and the next one. USPR 5 and USPR 6 were still in the field, still processing what they'd seen, when a new report came in. Another unauthorized object in the restricted zone. They responded, joined this time by a third agent, USPR 7. 3 agents now, fresh eyes, another chance to document whatever was moving through this space in the pre-dawn darkness. And they found it. Another kite-shaped object. Similar lighting pattern to the one they'd seen 30 minutes earlier. But this time, the object was not hovering at ankle height. It was approximately 6 meters off the ground, roughly 20 feet in the air, and it was canted at an angle. The documents specify lower right to upper left, as if it were tilted, as if it were leaning into a wind that the agents could not feel. And it was moving, slowly, drifting with the wind like a kite without a string, floating with a lazy, organic grace that felt less like propulsion and more like surrender, like it was letting the air carry it, like it was the air. Now I need you to pay very close attention to what happens next, because this is, in my opinion, the single most disturbing detail in all 4 encounters. USPR 5 put on the night vision goggles. They looked up at the kite-shaped object hovering 20 feet above the desert floor, and through the NVGs, through that green, luminous amplification of darkness, they saw something that, to this day, I cannot reconcile with any known material or technology. They could see stars through the object. Let me say that again. USPR 5 reported that they could vaguely see a bright star or two in the distance through the object, though somewhat more faint. The object was transparent, not invisible, not cloaked, not camouflaged. Transparent, like frosted glass, like looking at the sky through a smoky pane. The stars were still visible, dimmer, fainter, but there. The object was blocking some of the light, bending or absorbing it, but not all of it. It was partially there. What do you make of that? What do you do with a physical object that is simultaneously visible, kite-shaped, angled, floating, and yet partially transparent? An object with enough substance to block starlight, but not enough to fully obscure it. This is where the comfortable explanations go to die. And then there's USPR 7, the third agent, the fresh eyes, the new perspective. USPR 7 looked up at the same spot in the sky where USPR 5 was seeing this transparent, star-dimming kite, and saw nothing. USPR 7 did not see the object, could not see it. The same object the 2 other agents were observing, one through NVGs, watching stars flicker dimly through its translucent body, was invisible to a third observer standing right there. How is that possible? How can something be visible to 2 people and invisible to a third? Different visual acuity? Different angle? Or was the object doing something, behaving in a way that made it perceptible to some and not to others? The documents don't answer that question. They simply present the fact. 2 agents saw it. 1 did not. Now, the spotlight. USPR 5, perhaps frustrated by the ambiguity, perhaps driven by the kind of instinct that makes a good agent, reached for a spotlight. A beam of directed, focused light. The kind of tool that cuts through darkness and reveals what's hiding in it. They aimed it at the object, and the beam stopped. The spotlight beam appeared to stop approximately 50 yards away, on nothing, as if it had hit an invisible wall, as if the light had encountered a barrier in empty air, a surface with no substance, a plane of existence where photons simply ceased to travel forward. The beam stopped, and then, beyond that invisible barrier, it resumed. The light continued into the distance, past the interruption, as if nothing had happened, as if a slice of the air had simply swallowed a portion of the beam. USPR 5, likely with their hard hammering, pointed the light directly at the spot where the beam had stopped, the spot where something invisible had apparently intercepted a spotlight. The light projected normally, no interruption, no barrier, no nothing. The object was gone. Gone. In the time it took to redirect a spotlight. Gone, without a sound, without a trace, without leaving behind even the faintest echo of its presence. As if it had never been there at all. As if the desert had simply exhaled. 3 agents. 2 saw it, 1 didn't. A transparent, kite-shaped object, floating at an angle in the pre-dawn wind, dimming the light of the stars behind it. A spotlight beam that stopped mid-air on nothing. And then, absence. Silence. Just the dark desert and the empty sky. CTA. 1 minute. Now, if what you've heard tonight has stirred something in you, if it's made you sit a little closer to the edge of your seat, if it's made you glance out the window at the night sky, then I need to ask you for something small. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel reach more people who are looking for exactly this kind of content. Thoughtful, detailed, sourced deep dives into the mysteries that our government is only now beginning to acknowledge. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe and ring that bell, because these documents are still being declassified. There are more stories coming, and I don't want you to miss a single one. All right, let's wrap this up. Sustainability. 4 encounters. 4 sets of trained observers. 4 phenomena that defy the conventional explanations we've all been trained to reach for. Orbs that launch orbs. A fiery sphere the size of a building hovering without sound beside a rock pinnacle connected by something no one could identify. A dark, silent kite that moved across the desert like a shadow with intention. And a transparent twin, dimming the stars behind it, invisible to one set of eyes, but not another, stopping a spotlight beam in midair before vanishing without a trace. These are not stories from the fringe. These are declassified reports from the United States government's own investigative apparatus, filed by special agents, analyzed by AARO, released to the public through official channels. And here's what keeps me up at night. These 4 encounters, they are a fraction of what's in the Pursue collection. There are hundreds more of these reports, hundreds of incidents involving trained military and law enforcement observers, documented with dates and coordinates and witness statements spread across the western United States and beyond. The sheer volume of this material is staggering. And it's still being processed, still being analyzed, still being declassified. These federal agents risked their reputations to report what they saw. In a culture that often ridicules those who speak about the unexplained, they filed official reports. They stood by their observations. They did what they were trained to do. They told the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, is stranger than anything we could have imagined. Next time on Sleepy Deep Dives, we're going even deeper into the declassified record. I've been poring over a new set of documents that include encounters over water, near military installations, and at altitudes that will make your jaw drop. You won't want to miss it. Until then, Keep your eyes on the sky. Keep your mind open. And remember, just because you can't explain something doesn't mean it didn't happen. This has been Sleepy Deep Dives. I'll see you in the next one. Good night.